The mighty Russian Stefan Levitsky versus the American champion Frank Marshall are fighting tooth and nail in the Polish city of Breslau, 1912. A large crowd was gasping as one blow after another hit the chessboard, and then it happened. Marshall made a move that allowed his queen to be taken by 3 enemy pieces, yet any reply his opponent made would lose instantly. The audience went berserk, and to show their appreciation, literally showered the American with gold pieces. Chess is a game that has been played for over 1,500 years. A game that's a mix of war, tactics, and strategy. A game that improves your powers of logic and concentration and is, at this time, played by over 600 million people in every corner of the globe. I fell in love with chess when I was 12. The countless tales of adventure, the international intrigue, the fact that age and gender is a non-issue, and the wonderful feel of pure elation that hit me when I played well or even found one special move. All these things drew me to this game, and I wasn't alone. Though I was just starting out, I found that kings, artists, actors, politicians, scientists, the super rich, and the super poor loved it just like I did. Though people come from all areas of society, every nation and every religion, all share one common interest: chess. And when they get together, chess helps them speak the same universal language. When you play chess, you're suddenly part of something bigger than yourself, something exciting, something beyond the artificial borders that cover the earth. So, how do players thousands of miles away from each other come together? Some play postal chess, which allows you to take several days for just one move. Others travel, and when they do, a stop at the local chess club opens new doors and perspectives. Many just play family, friends, and co-workers. And several million take advantage of modern technology and play live online games against someone in China one night, Russia the next, and New Zealand after that. Most don't post their real names, which means you might be playing chess addicts already famous in other walks of life. Actors like Will Smith and Julia Roberts, world boxing champions like Vladimir Klitschko and Manny Pacquiao, musical performers like Sting and Madonna, basketball legend Wilt Chamberlain, TV host David Letterman, and the list of chess lovers goes on and on. In this course, you'll be immersed in chess culture. You'll embrace the science. You'll understand its sporting aspects. You'll learn to appreciate the art. And when all is said and done, you'll discover that you've become quite a strong player. And you might even find that you agree with the great chess player and teacher Siegbert Tarrasch, who said, "Chess, like love, like music, has the power to make men happy." Let's start with the chessboard. The board has always had the same number of squares, 8 by 8. Since the first chess-like games appeared, which is often given at 620 AD. However, while the light and dark checkerboards have been in use since the 11th century, the older boards didn't have any color differentiation at all. Chessboards generally come in wood, the most expensive and beautiful, and plastic, light and portable. In fact, the same can be said for chess pieces. Of course, you can find boards and pieces made out of glass, metal, and just about everything else. But wood and plastic are the go-to materials among the serious players. Just like there are road signs and freeways and various hazards to understand before you drive a car, the same goes for the chessboard. You have to understand the board's language or you won't be able to read chess notation, write down moves, or really understand what the chessboard or the pieces that are on it is all about. Though it wasn't always this way, now the universal chess notation is a system called algebraic. We'll start with the empty chessboard and the numbers and letters that make it possible to give a unique name to each and every square. You don't have to memorize the number and letter of every square. In fact, the vast majority of chess players haven't bothered to do so. Instead, I'm going to show you how to name a square in a straightforward and remarkably easy manner. A chessboard is, using military parlance, made up of files, which are the columns going from top to bottom or bottom to top, and ranks, the rows that go from side to side. Files are vertical, ranks are horizontal. So, files are the lines of squares that go from top to bottom. Think of lining up single file. Each of the files are given a letter, starting with A on the far left and ending with H on the far right. This is the A file. This is the D file. This is the G file. The numbers on the left side of our board, 1 through 8, signify the ranks. Thus we have the first rank, second rank, third rank, etc. Both sides use the same names for the ranks and files. So the 8th rank would be the 8th rank for both sides. The H file would be the same H file for both players. In a city, we don't change the names of streets depending on whether someone is coming from the north or the south, and it's the same on a chessboard. Same name for everybody. Pretty straightforward. If you want to highlight a particular square, you take the letter first and add the number, and that's the name of the square. For example, let's name this corner square. It's on the A file, and it's also on the first rank. So that is A1. Right. And it continues like this. The next square over, B1, then C1. Over here in the corner is A, B, C, D, E, F, G1. Let's try another, but this time we'll move off the first rank. The highlight square is sitting on the H file, and it's also sitting on the 8th rank. First the file, then the rank, which means that the square is named H8. Let's go to the middle of the board. This square is sitting on the D file, and it's sitting on the 5th rank. The answer? D5. The square on the right of D5 is E5. The square under E5, E4. What about this square? That's C3. Let's do the reverse and start with the name. Where's E7? Here. What about H8? Over here. That's right. And the A2 square? Excellent. This file rank grid is the backbone of chess notation, which shows exactly where a particular piece moved. That's why paper and plastic boards like this one show the letters and numbers. All we have to do is add one tiny, very obvious addition, the names of the pieces, to create perfect chess notation. There are 6 different pieces in chess: the king, the queen, the bishop, the knight, the rook, and the pawn. In chess notation, you take the first letter of the piece and add the square's name. For example, if a bishop landed on this square, how would you write down the move? We already know that the square is on the E file and 4th rank, meaning we'd write it as E4. Since we're talking about a bishop move, all you do is add a capital B, and you'll get BE4. If a queen moved to E4, it's QE4. If a king moves to E4, it would be KE4. The only 2 exceptions are the knight and pawn. The word knight also starts with a K, so we can't use that again. Due to this, we may see some people use KT, but most people use N. So if the knight moved to E4, it would be written as NE4. A pawn is even simpler. Just give the square's name, and that's that. This means that if a pawn moved to e4, it doesn't matter which side's pawn it is, you would simply write e4. Don't worry about it, but these abbreviations do change according to language. For example, the German name for the knight is Springer. So a German chess book would show a knight move to e4 as se4. I'll be using chess notation all through this course, so it will eventually become second nature. Writing down moves is really helpful in learning to improve your play, so I encourage you to try it. Tournament players of all levels have to write down their moves on a score sheet, but even non-tournament players do this since it's fun and instructive to look over your game after it's done. Let's do a very short game. f4, e6, g4, queen h4, mate. See? You can already read a tournament score sheet, and we haven't even moved a piece yet. And yes, white got checkmated in just 2 moves. Chess is literally a game of kings. Take your opponent's king and you win. Fail to protect your own king and you lose. All the other pieces contribute only indirectly to that single goal. So how much can each piece contribute? The point count system gives you an approximate valuation of each piece, and you'll find that it's something you can learn very quickly. The pawns, which are often viewed as sacrificial foot soldiers, are the weakest and least valuable units on the board. Just 1 point for the poor pawn. Knights and bishops are minor pieces, and they are considered to be of equal value, 3 points each. The rooks are extremely powerful, so they get a value of 5 points. Her Majesty the Queen is the strongest piece on the chessboard, so she tops the chart at 9 points. The king is beyond any value since its loss, which is checkmate, instantly ends the game. Naturally, these are approximations, but beginners can't do without them, and even tournament players often lean on point count as if their lives depended on it. Other values do appear from time to time, but these numbers are by far the most popular, and in my opinion, they're also the most accurate. What makes point count so valuable is it gives you the ability to avoid harmful exchanges while also allowing you to see if multiple exchanges are useful or detrimental. For example, if you could capture an enemy knight at the cost of one of your pawns, you'd usually jump at it, since the knight is worth 3 points and the pawn is only worth 1. Thus you would end up 2 points ahead. If you exchanged a bishop for an enemy knight, you wouldn't be too worried, since both pieces are worth 3 points, which is an even trade. Simple stuff, but sometimes it gets a bit more complicated. Look at the position on our board and try to figure out who you think is ahead on points. Once again, let's ignore how the pieces move. We only care what they're worth. Not counting the kings, which are beyond value, black has 3 units and white only has 1. However, that 1 is the extremely valuable queen. If you said it was an even trade, you're right. The queen is worth 9 points, while the rook, 5 points, knight, 3 points, and pawn, 1 point, combine to give us the same figure, 9 points. We can get a deeper understanding of point count by looking at the moves each piece can make from various positions on the board. We'll start with the king, queen, bishop, and rook, since their movements are straightforward and extremely easy to learn. Knights are far more complex, so we'll tackle that piece in Lecture 2. As for pawns, this might surprise you, but a pawn is the most complex piece on the chessboard. So you'll have to wait for Lecture 2 to acquire the pawn's secrets. It won't come as a surprise that the king and queen are the most important pieces on the chessboard. The queen is by far the strongest piece. It rules the board like demigods used to rule old Earth. However, it wasn't always like that. When chaturanga, which was the first version of chess, appeared in the 6th century AD, the queen was called a minister in India, an advisor to the king, and a farjin in Persia, which means wise man. The poor thing could only move one diagonal square in any direction, which makes it very weak indeed. In courtly Europe of the medieval era, the wise man became a wise woman, alferja in Spanish, or a queen. At first, her powers of movement were still limited, but by the time that the Renaissance appeared, where the queen sometimes had enormous power in real life, she also gained that kind of power in chess. So, in 1475, the weakling lifted some weights, put on Hulk-like muscle, and turned into the bored bully. This was the same time, within a year, that Isabella of Spain, already married to Ferdinand of Aragon, began to rule as Queen Isabella I of Castile. The famous player and writer Luis Ramirez de Lucena, who wrote the oldest existing chess book in 1497, mentioned the queen's new powers on the chessboard, and also invented the Lucena position, which we'll study in Lecture 20. The modern queen can move in all directions, forward and backwards on the files, left and right, and forward and backwards along a diagonal, whether on white or on black, all of which makes the queen the ultimate in long-range weapons. On an open board, the queen controls 21 squares if it's stuck in a corner. And in the middle of the open board, the queen controls 27 squares, which is a staggering 42% of the whole board. One look at the board, and you'll see just how much of a square hog the queen is. While the black queen, situated in the corner, still commands an enormous amount of territory. However, the very powers that make the queen so valuable also make it vulnerable, since its loss would be, in most cases, catastrophic. Thus, the queen is sometimes seen running from inferior pieces, since her demise to a lesser piece would ultimately mean the eventual fall of her husband, the king. Due to this, the queen, like any general, lets the troops rush into battle first. Once space is gained and a plan is clear, the queen will join with her faithful men and in very unladylike fashion will rend the enemy limb from limb. The queen captures the same way all pieces capture. They capture where they land. If some poor, unlucky enemy piece happens to be on that square, it's removed from the board and the queen takes its place. Of course, you're not allowed to capture your own pieces. Here's a good illustration. It's white to move and his queen is hungry. Can it take anything? A cannibal might want to eat one of his own with queen takes f1. But a white queen capturing a white rook is illegal. You can't eat your own army. However, a meal is available for Her Majesty. Here, at queen takes g7, wins a pawn, while also making black's king very uncomfortable due to the close proximity of white's queen. The king isn't the strongest piece by any measure, but it's clearly the most important. Simply put, you lose the king, you lose the game. All the other pieces can be traded and captured, but the king can't ever leave the board. Unlike the queen, which underwent a metamorphosis when it reached Europe, the king has moved in the exact same way since chess was invented. It was always viewed as some form of monarch, a Raja in India, a Shah in Persia, and a king when it reached Europe in the 9th and 10th centuries. The king can move one square at a time in any direction, diagonal forward and backward, left and right. Clearly, it's not a long-range piece. The king controls 8 squares in the middle of the board, 5 on the sides, and only 3 in the corner. Note that the square a piece sits on doesn't count as controlled. That's why white's king only controls 8 squares instead of 9. You can't give up your king. You also can't move it to an attack square. No suicide allowed. It doesn't matter who opposes the king. If that square is defended by any piece, a lowly pawn, or even another king, it's illegal for the king to move to that square. When another piece attacks the king, the attack is called a check. When checked, it has three options. The king moves to safety. The checking piece is captured by the king itself or some other piece. The check is blocked in some fashion. Black's queen is attacking white's king, thereby giving check. White has to get out of check, and there are 7 legal ways to do this. Can you find all of them? Of the 7, which move do you think would be best? Take a moment and give it a try. Did you see all 7 ways to get out of check? Take a look at the board and you'll find 5 squares where white's king can legally run. Note that d4 and f4 are no's, since white's king would still be attacked by black's queen, while moving to f5 is illegal since both kings would come into direct contact, something which never legally occurs. So far, we've seen that white's king can run to 5 legal squares and has to avoid 3 illegal squares. But didn't I promise that white's king had 7 legal ways to get out of check? Yes, I did. So here's the other 2. The first is an example of ending a check by blocking the attack. White plays his queen to d4, blocking the check and ending the immediate threat. The other way to end the check, and the best move, is a simple example of eliminating the threat by a capture. White takes black's queen by removing the enemy queen and placing your own queen on that square, thereby ending the check. Suddenly, white's king is no longer in any danger, and white has an extra queen, which means he should easily win the game. So, the king takes a long beauty rest, and the queen terrifies anyone that doesn't obey. The pawns grab space for the rest of the army and often sacrifice themselves for the greater good. And the bishops and knights wage one man-to-man battle after another. The rooks, though, which often have trouble finding roads into the enemy camp, are, once they warm up and get going, the enforcers. Each rook is a whopping 5 points. It carries a big stick, and everything other than a queen or enemy rook takes one glance and runs for the hills. Where bishops and knights often bark at enemy pieces in the middle of the board, rooks charge into the very roots of the enemy position, killing and eating everything in their path. The rook dominates files and ranks, and it has enjoyed the same movement for 1,500 years. Like the chariot from which it was derived, the rook was the strongest piece on the board until the 15th century, when the queen was given superpowers. But that doesn't make it any less deadly, and the rook is the only piece that controls the same number of squares on an open board from any position, 14. Normally, a centralized piece controls more squares than a non-centralized piece. But lo and behold, the position on our board proves that white's rook in the middle covers the same number of squares as black's rook on the side. So unlike all the other pieces, rooks do not have to go to the center of the board to be at their full strength. In the game of Chaturanga, there wasn't a bishop. Instead, there was an elephant. And it wasn't very strong. The elephant could only move on a diagonal, leaping over one square and landing on the next. The 15th century was a happening time, and when chess appeared in Europe, the slow pace of the elephant didn't impress anyone. So, since the piece stood next to the king and queen in the initial position, the European movers and shakers felt it was more logical to give the piece a new identity. In England, it became known as a dignitary of the church, working as spiritual emissaries to the royal couple. Its shape was changed. A mitre, the ceremonial headdress of bishops and abbots, was placed on its head, and its present powers were bestowed on it at the beginning of the 1500s. Where rooks are the rulers of files and ranks, bishops are the caretakers of diagonals. Bishops control as few as 7 squares on an empty board to as many as 13 squares. However, while rooks can reach any square and any color on the board, bishops can't, since they live on diagonals, which means that they'll always be stuck on the color of that diagonal. Looking at our live board, you can see that white's bishop is stuck on dark squares, while black's bishop can only touch light squares. This means that the bishops can't touch anything that isn't on the same color they are. Bishops like this are called bishops of opposite colors, and they are very much like ghosts. They can get near you, they can see you, but they can't ever touch you or hear you. When world chess champion Boris Spassky got divorced, someone asked him why the marriage didn't work. He said, "We were like bishops of opposite colors." We'll start our study of piece interactions with one universal, very important point. The only piece that can jump over other pieces is the knight, which we'll discuss in great detail in the next lecture. We already know that you can't capture your own pieces, but you also can't jump over your own pieces. Thus, if you have a queen, rook, or bishop sliding happily along a file, rank, or diagonal, and another piece, yours or the opponent's, gets in its way, the joyride will have to end with you pulling up before a collision occurs. It's illegal to ram into your own piece since you can't capture your own men. While if you insist on ramming into an enemy piece, polite players don't ram, you'll have to capture it. It's black's move and his rook, which is challenging the white queen's ownership of the d-file, would love to capture the queen on d2 by rook takes d2. However, that's illegal since you can't leap over another piece. Black's rook could run headlong into the d4 bishop and capture it. But then nothing would be guarding the rook and white would simply take back. This tiny sequence of moves doesn't look very promising in terms of point count. Black's decision to take on d4 wasn't very wise since he traded his rook, which was worth 5 points, for a bishop, which was only worth 3. Also notice the chess notation for a capture. Black's initial capture could be written as ... rook d4, which is completely valid, but most players prefer to add a little x when a capture occurs. Thus, instead of rook d4, I personally would write ... rook x d4, which means rook takes whatever is on d4. But both ... rook d4 and ... rook takes d4 are fine. Note the 3 periods before the move. That indicates a black move, while white's recapture on d4 doesn't have those periods since it's a white move. Let's return to the position we used a couple minutes ago. Once again, it's black's move. His queen must be starving because, against all logic, he decides on queen takes g2 check. This leads us to 2 more points about chess notation. As you can see, I added an X to the move to denote a capture, but I also added a plus sign. Why did I do that? Just as using the X is a matter of taste, the plus, which means check, is also a matter of taste. It's important to know these little additions so that you understand it if it's given in a book or here in the course. But it's also nice to know that you can personalize your notation by using or not using the X and the plus. Bringing our focus back to queen takes g2 check, the move is completely insane. Black made a check. Who cares? What really counts is that white would then have the wonderful choice of capturing black's queen in 2 different ways. Queen takes g2 check or king takes g2, when the bishop's 3 points can't compare with the queen's 9. Clearly, queen takes g2 check should be avoided like the plague. Now let's look at the same position, but white to move. If it was white's move in our initial position, white could give check by queen a2 check, but then queen f7, offering an even trade of queens, would be an adequate response. Queen takes queen check, king takes f7, and the game should be drawn. If white didn't want to give check, he might decide to move one of his bishops. But neither should be touched. Why? Take a moment and see if you can figure it out. White shouldn't move his d4 bishop, since that would allow rook takes d2, picking up white's queen. Moving the g2 bishop is, to put it bluntly, illegal. Any move by that bishop would place the white king in check. Since you aren't allowed to put yourself in check, the move isn't allowed. Point count and chess notation are very useful, and you'll easily get a feel for both as time goes on. More important, though, is the movement of the pieces. If you don't have that down, you can't play or understand the game. So please review that material again and again until you've fully mastered it. Everyone knows that chess is about moves and strategies, but it's also about the history, culture, and, believe it or not, adventures that led to the game as it is now, all of which can take you to some very deep places. Without the past, the chess heroes of today wouldn't exist. And without knowledge of chess history, you wouldn't be able to enjoy the artists that came before us and that made the game what it is today. You would miss sparkling games of pure genius, tales that one would think could only happen in a movie, and strategies that are still just as important now as they were then. So, aside from learning how to play, you'll also immerse yourself into the lives of legend, tales of bygone times, and the agony and ecstasy that is part of everyone's path. All that is chess, and it's waiting for you in the lectures to come.